Sensors show motion in sublevel 2, unscheduled.
It's just the custodian. Let him finish his rounds.
He's humming again.
Vexori Thon had rehearsed 400 first contact protocols in training, and not one of them had prepared him for a human whistling. He watched the specimen through the corridor monitor, designation Dale, custodian, 3rd class, the lowest rank the Calyxian Concord had bothered to invent, as it dragged a bucket down the east corridor of Outpost Rhen-9, sloshing water and humming a tune with no threat signature anywhere in the Concord's entire linguistic archive. Vexori logged the moment as routine. He did not believe his own log entry for a second. I've had worse Mondays, honestly. That's the whole story if you want the short version. The coolant line in sublevel 2 had iced over again, which meant somebody had to go down with a heat gun and a bad attitude, and since I was the only human assigned to a station otherwise staffed entirely by very courteous crystal people who communicated in hums and light patterns, that somebody was me. I brought coffee. I brought my good gloves. I did not bring a jacket, because the thermostat down there reads brisk, and I've stood at bus stops and worse. Dr. Mareth Cole had been assigned to Rhen-9 to study human biology at a comfortable, theoretical distance, charts, scans, the occasional blood sample volunteered with a shrug, and a sure, why not? She had not expected to watch the subject wrench open a coolant hatch rated for 400 kilograms of hydraulic force using a crowbar and what her instruments logged, almost apologetically, as casual annoyance. The hatch came off its hinges with a sound like a gunshot. Dale said, "There we go, the way other people announce they found their keys." Mareth ran the numbers twice. The numbers did not improve on a second look. She sent a flag to Security Officer Vexori marked routine anomaly, because marking it anything else would have meant admitting she didn't understand what she was looking at, and admitting that felt premature. What kind of species built maintenance staff like this? She didn't send that question anywhere. She just kept watching. The hatch thing wasn't even the annoying part. The annoying part was the raccoon. Okay, it wasn't a raccoon. I want to be clear about that because I told the story back at the depot and somebody's going to say, there are no raccoons in space, like I don't know that. What came out of the ventilation shaft into sublevel 2 was gray, low, fast, had entirely too many limbs, and looked at me like it was deeply offended I existed. I looked back the way you look at any animal that's gotten somewhere it shouldn't be. I got the broom. Vexori's readings on the creature in the vent, internally catalogued, with some embarrassment, as a Concord biodeterrent unit, one of 6 seated aboard Rhen-9 during initial construction as a failsafe against exactly this kind of unauthorized human wandering, spiked into territory his training manual referred to only as engagement imminent, casualties expected. He braced for the report he'd have to file. The report he ended up filing was 3 words long. It left calmly. It did not leave calmly. It left because Dale swept it down the corridor like a dust bunny, opened an airlock door with his elbow because his hands were full, and said, and this is a direct quote from the station audio log, "Out you go, buddy, wrong building." The biodeterrent unit, designed to disable a landing party of up to 12 armed Concord Marines, did not so much as scratch him. Vexori watched the footage 4 times. He did not sleep that night, and Concord physiology does not require sleep, which should tell you something about the night he had. Security Officer Vexori's console screamed at him twice in one shift, which had never happened in his 11 years of service, and the second scream was worse than the first. Sublevel 2's outer maintenance hatch had failed to reseal after Dale ducked through it to retrieve a dropped multi-tool, venting the corridor to hard vacuum for what the sensors logged as 41 seconds. Standard Concord doctrine allotted an unprotected technician roughly 6 seconds of useful consciousness in that scenario, and considerably less time before recovery became impossible. Vexori did not expect to see Dale walk back through that hatch at all. Yeah, that hatch thing was dumb, I'll give you that one. I dropped my multi-tool through the grating while I was leaning over to check a valve, and the door swung shut behind me the way doors do when you're not paying attention, and for a second the hallway got real quiet and real cold. I held my breath, grabbed the tool, and shoved the door back open with my shoulder before it locked all the way. Wasn't my finest moment, honestly. I did feel a little lightheaded walking back, which I chalked up to skipping breakfast and made a mental note to eat something before my next shift instead of, whatever the actual explanation turned out to be. Vexori watched Dale reappear on the monitor, rubbing his ears like a man who'd stood up too fast and understood, with a calm that felt entirely wrong for the moment, that he was no longer equipped to assess the danger in front of him using any framework the Concord had ever given him. He requested a full review from Command. Command's answer arrived 11 seconds later, and it was one word long: escalate. High Commander Issa Vorn received the reports in the order they were filed, which meant she got the coolant hatch, then the biodeterrent, then, worst of all, the paperwork. Specifically, the personnel file. She had assumed, reasonably, that a species capable of what she was watching on Rhen-9 had sent her its finest, some hardened specialist, a soldier in a maintenance uniform, a controlled test. The file said otherwise. The file said Dale Merrow had failed a promotional exam twice, was described by a former supervisor as reliable if you remind him, and had taken this posting specifically because it paid better than his last job, which was fixing vending machines. Issa read the file a third time in case a translation error had crept in somewhere. There was no translation error. This was, by every human metric available to her, an average man having an unremarkable week. So Issa did what any good commander does when one data point refuses to make sense. She asked for more data points. She requested comparable personnel files from every other human posted to joint stations across Concord space, expecting, at minimum, a handful of outliers to explain Dale away as some rare specimen. There were no outliers. There were 41 other humans on 41 other stations, doing 41 other unremarkable jobs, and every single supervisor's note read some version of the same thing. Solid worker, doesn't complain, occasionally needs reminding to fill out his timesheet. Not one file mentioned training in combat. Not one file mentioned anything at all. Issa sat with that for a long moment, because the alternative to Dale is unusual was Dale is standard, and standard was a much worse word. Which was the exact moment the wasp problem started. Not wasps either, before anyone writes in. What I found nesting in the crawl space above sublevel 3 was some kind of chittering, clustered thing, dense as a beehive and about the size of a refrigerator, tucked into a maintenance duct that hadn't been on any of the schematics I'd been given. My job description said, keep the station running, and a refrigerator-sized nest humming ominously above the wiring did not strike me as running. I did what I do at home when the wasps get under the porch. I got the spray, I got a tarp, and I got it done before lunch. What Dale called the wasp problem was, according to every reading Maretha's team could take, the Concord's dormant swarm seed, a self-replicating contingency asset buried in Rhen-9's substructure since before the station was built, designed to activate and overwhelm any hostile force that made it past the outer hull. It had never been meant to be found, let alone opened, let alone hosed down with a can of something Dale's paperwork listed as bug spray, off-brand, does the job. The swarm seed's activation sequence triggered for exactly 4 seconds before the entire cluster went inert, sprayed, tangled in a plastic tarp, and, per the audio log, handled. Vexori submitted his resignation that afternoon. Issa did not accept it. She needed him conscious for what came next. What came next was Issa doing what she should have done from the beginning, which was pulling the full Concord intelligence file on humanity instead of the summary. It was longer than she expected. It included, buried in a section marked low priority, civilian sector, a note that read, species routinely assigns its least trained members to isolated, low-status maintenance work. Combat-capable personnel are not typically posted to civilian infrastructure. Issa read that sentence 4 times. Then she looked at the monitor, where the least trained member of an entire species was currently rewiring a coolant system with his bare hands while whistling, having personally and unknowingly neutralized 2 separate Concord contingency weapons before his lunch break, and understood, with the particular clarity that arrives about 1 report too late, exactly what civilian sector meant on a planet like Earth. She did not send a formal first contact delegation after that. She sent a very carefully worded request for a maintenance contract renewal and a small, private note to Vexori suggesting they never, under any circumstances, send Dale a performance review. Mareth, for her part, filed 1 final entry in her research log before quietly reclassifying the entire project from biology to theology. The entry read, in full, Recommend future observation be conducted from a greater distance and possibly a different galaxy. Anyway, I got the coolant line fixed, dealt with a thing in the vent, cleared out that nest situation before it got worse, and still had time to grab lunch before my shift ended, which I'm counting as a genuinely productive day. Station management sent over a little note afterward thanking me for my diligence and restraint, which felt like a strange thing to put on a maintenance report, but I've had weirder feedback from weirder managers, so I didn't think much of it. They also asked, very politely, whether I'd be willing to extend my contract. I said sure, why not? The coffee's decent and nobody here's ever once complained about my music. Tomorrow I'm supposed to look at something they're calling the archive nest on sublevel 4. Command wouldn't tell me what's actually stored down there, only that they'd greatly appreciate a light touch. I told them light touch was kind of my whole thing. Probably just more wasps.